morning. I'd like to start by reading from Whispers from Eternity. Bless me that I may perceive thee through the windows of all joyous activities. Look upon me and cheer me always as I engage in my daily duties. Let my every action, whether waking, sleeping, or dreaming, be sprayed by the fountain of thy presence. We all aspire to live, we say 24/7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in the awareness of God's presence. And since God is by definition always present, that should be easy. But somehow it doesn't work that way. Somehow there's just some little thing that keeps us from perceiving that presence. And I'd like to talk today about the restlessness of the mind. The recognition that the mind somehow, our attention, somehow is being diverted from our goal of perceiving God's presence not only beyond the creation, but within the creation. We should be able to perceive God everywhere. When you're driving down the road and people are all over the place, God is present. When you're in the shop, in the mall, the other day I went over to this, Palace of India mall. Oh my goodness, this is the most crowded place I've ever been in India. It was absolutely packed. I could not even begin to believe how crowded this place was. God was present. God was present. But I guarantee you, not everybody in that mall knew that God was present. When you're sitting at your desk, when you're doing your duties around the house, when you're playing with the children, it doesn't matter. God is present. But the mind is not present with God. And we know from the classical definition by Patanjali, what is yoga? Yoga is chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is the neutralization of the vrittis, the whirlpools, the energy fields that live inside our consciousness. We need to be disconnected from, released from all of those connections. And the place that we experience it most clearly each and every day is in the mind that we live through as we do all these activities. But spiritual truth can be understood, as Yoganandaji taught, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. All these levels of reality. And so I want to give us a few little tips, a few little tricks, things that we can pay attention to physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, in order to begin to break through, to release ourselves from the past, and to break through and perceive God's presence right here, right now, in everything that we do. So we start with the body. Remember, let me step back once more and say that, we all know what do we practice in order to calm the mind? Meditation. And the classic analogy that's given for meditation is the calm surface of a pool of water, whether it be a lake or the ocean. And the moon reflected in that ocean, when the lake is calm, when the waters are calm, that reflection is perfect. If the mind and the consciousness is calm, we would perfectly reflect spirit. But when there are waves on the water, when the wind blows, then those waves cause agitation and it breaks up that reflection, and no longer is that reflection perfect. Well, this idea that the water can become agitated is not just from one thing. It's not just the wind. It's everything that we do. Our consciousness is body, mind, and spirit. It's not just mind. It's connected to all of these things. So if we want to talk about our very ability to perceive anything, we have to recognize that the ability to perceive itself is what we're trying to experience without agitation. And that ability to perceive is happening body, mind, and spirit simultaneously. So when you talk about causing agitation to calmness, and you look at it from the physical point of view, what are the things that can cause us to be physically agitated? Well, disease, ill health, of course. That's common. If you're ill, if your body, and you can be mentally ill too, but if your body is not well, then it's difficult to experience calmness. And so this is one of the reasons that we try to take good care of the body. The body is the temple, and the heart is the altar. Yoganandraji said that silence is the altar of spirit. Silence represents calmness. Silence represents that very deep, calm state where we can experience our devotion universally, not just individually. So, disease, we have to take care of the body. If we're not taking care of the body, then it makes it more difficult to be calm, to perceive God's presence. So we eat well. We want to eat well. And if we look at the food that we eat, we can recognize that we are affected, the mind, the calmness is affected by the food that we eat. This is why yogis recommend a vegetarian diet. It's not because of killing. Yes, that is a factor. But the number one reason is because it's agitating to the mind. Why is it agitating to the mind? Well, killing is a factor, but the reason that we eat fruit is because it's more alive. It has more life force. It has more, and that life force is less downward pulling. Yes, meat is energizing, but it's tama raja. It's downward pulling, activating, rather than fruit, which is elevating. Is activating, elevating. So when you look at over-refined foods, there's no life force. When you look at, now in India, I'm going to get into trouble here, but this is not my personal teaching, I'm just the messenger. Too much spice in the food is actually, and this is why yogis teach you should not, yogis, if they're really aware of the mind and the calmness, they don't eat onions. Now, if you're going to eat onions, cook them. They're less agitating if you cook them. But if you eat them raw, they're very agitating. Garlic is the same. Now, both onions and garlic are said to have some beneficial health usages. So this is a little bit of a yin-yang, a positive-negative situation. And you have to listen to your body. You have to learn to listen to your body on something like this and see how you are affected by it. sometimes we are so unaware of what's going on that we don't really know how we're being affected. I have been very aware in my life of how onions affect me. So if I eat raw onions, less than 4 hours before I sleep, I have very agitating dreams. And I've seen this effect over enough time. Well, I saw it. I very rarely do it. But my early years of training, and when I was becoming more and more aware of these things, then I saw this direct correlation. But I also saw that if they were cooked, it was much less of an effect. So I recommend that you experiment with this. See how you feel as the result of these things. Now, Master loved Indian food. Of course, it was his native food, and he cooked it all the time in America. And he taught, we know through Swamiji, that he taught that you should enjoy your food. So it's not wrong to enjoy your food. And if you're Indian, it's hard to enjoy your food if it's not spicy. So you have to experiment with it. Of course, this is only one thing. When we look at the totality of the way that we live, if you eat spicy food over here, okay, then you can do these other calming things over here, which we'll talk more about. But we have to recognize that we are affected, or at least may be affected, by everything that we do. And so we want to begin to do everything that we do consciously. So in the old days, the ego days, the process would be, I'll make decisions based on pleasure. What will I enjoy the most? But now we want to make these decisions based on what will help me to perceive God's presence most. What will help me to be a representative of God's presence most. This is the most basic change that we want to make. So we have to look at our diet. And of course, most Indians today are, well, I shouldn't say that. Well, I do believe that it's still most Indians are vegetarian today, but more and more Indians have been caught up in non-veg and do eat meat. And many of you maybe even have grown up or have eaten non-veg foods. And the eating of meat in itself does not keep you from perceiving God's presence, but it's a hindrance. So when Master came to America, and Dr. Lewis, who was his first American Kriya Yoga disciple, and a meat eater, and so Master encouraged him to become vegetarian. But he became a vegetarian too quickly, and he began to have physical problems as a result of it. I myself had that same experience. I became a vegetarian one day, that was it, no more meat. And I began to, basically my stomach was so used to the process of digesting meat that I began to have ulcer-like symptoms. And then I had to eat meat again and then taper off gradually. But the recognition that our bodies may even crave things that are not healthy for us because it becomes used to it. So if your body is used to saying, this is what I like to eat, this doesn't mean you can't be trained to do something different. And to recognize that the foods we eat create certain physiological reactions which have mental ramifications as well. One of the great the two great ones that we have internationally are sugar and caffeine. These are both very powerful stimulants. And many parents wonder, well, why can't I get my child to go to sleep at night? But they give them soda, an hour before going to bed, which is sugar. Or, if you're used to drinking coffee or tea, Now, it's true, it's one of the strange things that can happen is some people are less affected by caffeine than others. Priyanandaji used to say that he could drink tea or coffee in the evening, and he said he had no trouble sleeping, but towards later in life he really had trouble sleeping. So I'm sure there was other things involved. But you have to be honestly attentive and say, well, how am I affected by these things? I'm not I never drink coffee. I don't like coffee. And I don't drink soda. Since I was a child, I didn't like soda because I don't like carbonation. So I have never drank a Coca-Cola. I'm an American who has never, I tasted it one time, couldn't stand it. That's very unusual. I've never eaten a Big Mac. It's a claim to fame. I'm proud of that. I want a badge. I've never eaten a Big Mac. My protest to people who eat meat. But these sugar, and it's a very big problem in America, attention deficit disorder. This young people not being able to concentrate. And unfortunately, the modern medicine has no idea what they're doing. If they would stop giving these kids Ritalin and antidepressants and take sugar and caffeine out of their diets and stop putting in front of the television every day for hours, which is one of the most mind-agitating things you can do is watch television. It's extremely agitating to the mind. And it's much worse than the radio because it's visual. But the radio is the same. So now I've talked about sugar, caffeine, the radio, and the television. These are extremely agitating to the mind. And so what happens when the mind becomes restless and agitated? People start tapping their feet. You see people observe this when you go to a restaurant sometime. One of these large cafe style Halderons. Go in there and watch how people sit. What are their bodies doing while they're sitting? And I guarantee you 50% or more of the people that you see in there will be shaking a leg or tapping a foot or moving some body part, constantly in motion. And we wonder why we can't perceive God's presence. Because we're drawn out into the body through these activating processes. And so we have to become more conscious. You can't avoid all of these things, but we have to recognize that they have a very powerful effect on us. And if we want to counterbalance that effect, then the stronger that effect is, the more energy we have to put into counterbalancing it. The weaker it is, the less energy. So the more conscious we are of eating properly, or of how we're affected by what we eat, the less energy we have to put into it. Well, the body can be used to help calm the mind too. And all medicine east and west today will recommend exercise. Exercise is not just good for getting clearing out the physical system, which it is good for in that. But if you take a nice long walk without the headphones, it amazes me. My mind is just, I'm saying the power of the dark side of the force. When you see somebody doing a really good thing and then counterbalancing that good thing by something that isn't very good. So you see people out in nature, walking out in nature, and they've got the radio on their head. Or even worse, they're out in all that fresh air and they're smoking. It's just, you scratch your head, but you see this all the time. We help ourselves on one hand while we hurt ourselves with the other hand at the very same time. Of course, we know that physically, the most calming exercise that you can do is not sleep. It's not sleep. Ultimately, it's deep meditation. But what do we use in order to transition to that? Hatha yoga. And so when we use Hatha yoga properly, what we're doing is getting the energy flowing in the body, cleaning things out, and releasing tensions in the muscles, and pressure pointing the various organs and points in the body. This mixture of things that we do through Hatha yoga is incredibly calming to the body, and this is why the yogis developed it as preparation for meditation. If you practice Ananda-style yoga, when you're done, you're ready to meditate. And when we end the Hatha yoga program, we go into deep relaxation. And then you consciously switch off the energy to the body, and then you allow your mind in a state of superconscious rather than subconscious awareness. You consciously begin to practice expanding letting your mind go out into the universe, instead of thinking that the mind lives in the body. Our awareness does not live in the body. It's only used to living in the body. Its natural habitat is omnipresence. That is the natural habitat of the soul, omnipresence. And the confines of the physical body and the perception that we are a brain is a complete delusion. So walking, running, and of course, Yoganandaji, when he was a young man, he was a track star. He was very fast. And later, he learned to play tennis. And he was all over the court. He was so fast running, it was very difficult for people to hit the ball where he couldn't get to it. Any good sport, even rough sports can be good, especially when you're young. When in the early years of Ananda, we used to play football. We call it soccer, but football. And we would go down to the high school in town, because we didn't have our own field. And it was a beautiful green, very large grass area. And we would bring cones just to set up the goal. But we were living out in the country. We were kind of, if you were stylistically, we were sort of mountain men. We wore blue jeans and boots. And our boots had, some of our times our boots had this steel protection, because if you drop something heavy on your toes, you don't want it to cause damage. So these boots were like army, they were tough. And so we had no subtle technique of football, where you throw it up and knock it around. We were gladiators. We would just, and in good football, you kick it to the guy over there, there's a strategy. Our only strategy was throw yourself at the ball and give it your full enthusiasm. So we would just kick the ball, but nobody ever got hurt, which was really a miracle, because we did it with good intention, joyful enthusiasm. This kind of attitude brought to sports. In fact, we used to play volleyball too, and people were much more concerned by doing their best, by playing hard, and enjoying anybody who manifested that and successfully. So if the guy on the other team scored against you, yeah, good one. Didn't matter that your team lost. It was all about just exuberant fun in the spirit of fellowship. But that activity is extremely important, particularly in young men. Young men need physical exercise. And I don't mean that women shouldn't, they should. But young men have so much going on physically, outwardly, that if they really want to calm the whole system down, they need to have vigorous physical exercise. So anything that, I guess one of the points I'm trying to make is doing physical exercise that you enjoy. That enjoyment is an important component. And swimming and anything really. Cricket, I'm sorry, I'm going to get really into trouble now, but cricket is much like American baseball. It's not very active. There's only 3 people playing the game most of the time. And it's the same in American baseball. There's you call him a bowler or pitcher? I don't know. We call it the pitcher, the one who throws the ball. He gets to play everyone. And the man behind it, we call him the catcher. He's in everyone. And the batter. But everybody else is just standing around. So, generally speaking, cricketers and baseball, they're not getting fit by playing. They get fit by training, so that they can be ready for that important 10, 15 seconds. Now, American basketball or football, these are sports that require very high levels of conditioning. And tennis is very demanding physically. And so any sport that you enjoy, but you have to try to stay aerobically fit. It's really very beneficial. And it's calming. And of course we know that runners always talk about getting, the positive endorphins that happen. That's only the physiological side of it. But there are people, if you just, look, when people get upset, they say, take a walk. Just go let your head clear out. That's calming. So these are physical things that we can do, and they're connected to the mental. They're not separate. When you're more and more aware of the mind, then you begin to recognize those times. What does it feel like to feel calm? Most of us didn't grow up knowing what it felt like to feel calm and happy. Not excited happy, but calmly happy. The happiness of the soul, not the stimulation of the ego in the pleasure zone. So when we practice meditation, we go into deeper and deeper levels of calmness. We begin to remember what calmness should feel like. And then we should begin to practice that in activity. And the more we do that, then we'll recognize, once we've learned to feel calm in activity, we'll begin to recognize when we don't feel calm more easily. We'll recognize that. I trained in the martial arts for a number of years. I found that it was incredible, not for fighting, but for training, for self-development. And what I found is that one of the things that you learn when you practice the martial arts, and Master actually encouraged the practice of martial arts, but not for fighting, but for training. And the thing is, you learn to be calm amidst something that's not generally perceived as calm. The martial arts are scary. The martial arts are physical. But one of the most important things that you learn to do is to stay calm amidst that intense experience. And this is something that happens through the practice of meditation. This interiorization of the mind, the calming of the mind, so that when agitating things happen in life, our minds don't automatically go into the emotions and get overly excited, whether it be positive or negative excitement about the things that we're experiencing. This causes agitation to the mind. When we become emotionally reactive to anything in life, that's why we say, well, karma, everybody would, if you're going to have karma, you'd rather have good karma than bad karma. But yogis don't want any karma. We want to release ourselves from all karma. We don't want to have to come back for, if you're an American, apple pie. If you're an Indian, samosas or gulab jamun. You don't want to have to come back just for that. As divine as they are, you don't want to have to come back for that. So when we talk about emotion, our emotional process, we recognize that, remember back to yoga's chitta vritti nirodha, it's the feelings, it's those emotional attachments that we have to everything that happens in life that are most binding, that are most limiting to our consciousness. So when something really good happens to you, something that you're pleased about, are you one of these people like on one of these TV shows that you see them and they win the lottery or all of these sports people, the way that they celebrate, they got a point, so they're going, oh, yeah, oh, all the crazy things that they do. And they got so crazy with it in American football that they started having to make rules about what they could do when they celebrated, because they got into trouble doing celebrating. And in fact, after the team wins the baseball or basketball, you've won the end of the season, you won it all. You are the #1 team in the world. So what do the fans go? They're so excited. Our team won. They go out and they have a riot. They go out and they smash things and they steal things and they push over cars and they burn them. But see, this is what the emotions do. We wonder why we don't experience peace. They got so happy they ended up in jail. It doesn't make any sense. And this is the power of the world to distract us from experiencing God's presence all the time. So, of course, we say that women have a feeling nature, men have a reasoning nature, and this is a big generalization. Excuse me, guys get really emotional, and women can think as clearly as they determine that they want to. A calculating woman is a powerful force to be reckoned with. But the reality is that we all experience these things. Children, men, women, all ages. We are drawn into our emotions, and we have to recognize that when we let our emotions go too far, when we don't keep them connected to calmness. So when you experience praise, that's good. You can smile, do it genuinely, but don't let it take you into restlessness. When somebody blames you, when things go wrong, stay centered. Stay in your peace. Take responsibility if you made a mistake. If you're falsely blamed, keep your peace. Because it doesn't matter what goes on out there. There's going to be good days, the sun will shine, no bad days when the monsoons will causing a flood. And these ups and downs happen in every area of life. If we let our emotions control our happiness, we won't be at peace, we won't receive God's presence. So be more and more conscious of this. The most central thing that we can do in order to experience peace, to release ourselves from all of the things that we've been talking about, controlling our happiness, our peace of mind, and to expand our consciousness into an ever greater awareness of God's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week presence in our lives, is meditation. This is the most power, the single most powerful thing that we can do to calm the mind, Bhamsa technique. There's nothing better. Cleaning out the samskars of the past, Kriya Yoga. There is nothing better. If you had diabetes, the kind where you have to take insulin shots, you would be regular, wouldn't you? You'd have your meter, your sugar meter, and then you'd be dead. You wouldn't miss. Let Kriya Yoga be your insulin. Let the recognition that we want to experience God's presence all the time, and in order to do that, we have to have a calm mind. And the practice of meditation, however you work at this into your life, whether you do it, 5 minutes 10 times a day, half an hour twice a day, 2 hours in the morning, 3 in the evening. That's a major league. We have to decide what playground we want to play on. How much of it do you want? But to recognize that there's the things that we avoid in order to stop becoming unnecessarily agitated. I've talked about some of those things. And then there's things that we do in order to dissipate that agitation. And to simultaneously grow our awareness. The more powerfully we can control the mind and connect it to the spiritual eye, to perceive directly God's presence. That presence dissolves all other things. That's why Yoganandaji, when he dropped, the cement was dropped on his foot, he broke his foot. When he put his mind here, he didn't feel anything. When he let his mind come down here, he felt the pain. His foot was broken. And you could see the pain on his face. He had 100% control. We want to begin to gain more and more control over the mind. Our level of interconnection, our calmness. And all the things that we've talked about are things that we can experiment with. But the more time you spend in the laboratory, in the training center of your consciousness, living consciously to connect yourself to this inner calmness, the more you'll have of it. And each of us has that choice, 24/7. When I'm in the Palace of India Mall, what am I looking at? Spirit or delusion? Because spirit is there. Spirit is there if I can perceive it. So, take these thoughts into your life, experiment with them, and remember that it's our choice. If we want to perceive God's presence 24/7, then that's where we have to direct our mind. And the more we do to support that effort, the more successful we will be. Namaskar.